and new creativity is emerging.
Okay, thank you very much. We've got another question here, and then I'll go over there. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I just want to reiterate thank you for coming together. I'm Katie Denny, and I'm an NYU alum, and I also work at the Department of Cultural Affairs here in the city. And my question is sort of piggybacking off of yours, slightly different, and it's also twofold in that I'm interested in hearing about the relationship not with DoD and the Department of State, but with those two entities and UNESCO. And I'm wondering what sort of communication or partnerships take place between those two entities. And I'm thinking with public diplomacy and reading the strategies in Afghanistan and Pakistan that came out of the US Department of State, there are things like working on their agriculture field, but not really at their cultural field. And I wonder if there's a perception that that's UNESCO's job, who's doing diplomatic efforts in terms of some of their arts and culture in Afghanistan. So that, and I'm wondering if my second question is, does that have anything to do with impact, which was discussed? And is it because with something like agriculture, you can easily measure the impact of how that is working in their society, whereas with something like the monuments, the Buddhas in Afghanistan that UNESCO is working on restoring, which is behavior or preservation or tradition, how can you measure things like that? How can you measure things like dialogue and the impact that that has on the society?
Anybody else want to take? I'll have some comment. Anybody want to? Eduardo and then Rachel.
No, thank you.
Oh no, I'm sorry, Rachel or who? You want me to go first? Okay, whatever. All right, I'll go first. First of all, on conversations with UNESCO between the U.S. Government, when I was on the commission. I thoroughly supported that in terms of people outside of the International Organizations Bureau who are responsible for, the State Department's views on UNESCO. Our previous ambassador and the current ambassador, David Killian, are both extremely interested in using UNESCO. However, there is a feeling, not a feeling, there is a sort of a lethargy among most people in the State Department that, oh well, UNESCO's out there, but it's something that we might get to if we get to it. It was very difficult to get for example, the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs to agree to put some, and we eventually did get some, to put some money into public diplomacy efforts in UNESCO along the lines that you're talking about. I'm not talking about propositions for U.S. policies or anything like that. So there needs to be more of that, and UNESCO needs to become more appreciated and should be more appreciated. So that's an advocacy issue. In terms of measurement, these things can be measured. It's not easy to measure. Anybody who's been in a political campaign knows that you can measure cultural reactions, and you can measure them in real time. It costs money to do that. There's no question. But with cell phones, it's cheaper. And so there are measures where attitudes change. People react positively or negatively. You can also do survey instruments, etc. That is there. And the problem is that it comes and it goes and it isn't sustained, at least so far. And the General Accounting Office has complained about this. The Congressional Research Service has had criticisms about this, etc. Coming to Bamiyan, which you were referring to, and then I'll stop. There is no question that, and UNESCO was in the lead on Bamiyan with Munir Bushnaki, who went and tried to get clerics in Egypt and so on and so forth, and it didn't work. I mean, Bamiyan eventually was imploded or exploded or whatever, but now trying to restore, and hopefully at least some of that can be done. But one of the things that there's a small program at the State Department called, what is it, the Fund for Preservation, Ambassador's Fund for Preservation. It has about $5 million. I'm sure I haven't precisely worded that correctly, but it's something like that. And one of the things that we've discovered from the evaluations is that, if not the highest, close to the highest sort of approval ratings of the work where American money goes in to restore, antique World Heritage sites, but also not, things that aren't World Heritage sites. There's a real bump in approval where they've been measured. And so on the preservation side of things, whether it's the restoration of Bamiyan or it's keeping Angkor Wat from falling apart and people taking all sorts of stuff out of it and all that kind of thing, there is no question that helping people preserve their heritage is popular, not just with the professionals who are in the preservation field, but it is popular with people because it shows respect. Anybody want to add to that?
Yeah, just a couple of points.
I'm going to come to you after, and then I'm going to go here and then over there, and then over there, and then I'm probably going to have to wrap it, or our friends at the John Bradham Center are going to, I don't know, do something nasty to me. Go ahead.
In terms of the dialogue between the U.S. and UNESCO, you might be aware that the U.S. had withdrawn from UNESCO in the mid-'80s and was outside of UNESCO, and the U.K. followed afterwards for practically 20 years, and then just recently came back. And so that conversation has really picked up, because now that the U.S. is back as a member state of UNESCO, having been one of the founders of UNESCO, we're very much interested in changing and enhancing and improving all of our policies and all of our practices. And we have, as the U.S. mission has, within the General Conference, a strong voice in how we can look at freedom of expression, how we're going about intercultural dialogue, revamping the role of education. So we're really working a lot more together now. And within the U.S. community, there's something called a National Commission for UNESCO, which isn't like the permanent delegation of the U.S. to UNESCO in Paris, but the National Commission is really taking a membership of civil society, of academics. They're based in the State Department, but they also help relay the messages and the interest of UNESCO to the American public, and they also pick up issues that are important here that they want to push ahead within UNESCO's General Conference, and they communicate with us in that sense. So there is a new, better relationship, but it does need to be improved, because also I think within the U.S. there's a lot more awareness raising that needs to go on about UNESCO in general, but about all these issues, whether it's UNESCO or another entity that's advocating this. It's the importance of culture and cultural dialogue. It's very difficult to measure intercultural dialogue. We can measure it when we see, again, a government changing their educational policy or changing their cultural policy, but when you're talking about on the ground, how is it working, we do look at statistics. We have a report about education under attack, for example, or the global monitoring report on education for all, and how many girls are in school, how many dropouts are there in various countries. So in that sense, it's more on education, but it's not really looking. It doesn't give us really concrete numbers on how is that intercultural dialogue having an impact. It's hard to measure in a number. But when you think about how much the U.S. is looking at its activity in Afghanistan, they're asking us all the time for these kinds of guidelines on girls' education, on building that cohesion in civil society, that social integration. That's very much a point raised by Frank Herzl in terms of the military presence on the ground. They have to be culturally sensitive. How are we building that infrastructure? And they look a lot to UNESCO's guidelines, programs, research. We've just come out, this is from this year, we've just launched it, Investing in Cultural Diversity and Intercultural Dialogue. This has that kind of information as to what inroads you can make so that you are having that positive impact and that positive relationship in a situation like the U.S. in Afghanistan or the U.S. in Iraq. The Bamiyan Buddhas, just so people understand a little bit about what was just alluded to, when we heard that the Taliban was going to destroy, they announced it in advance that they were going to destroy the Bamiyan Buddhas because of their interpretation of Islam. Munir Bushnaki, who is a fantastic Algerian archaeologue, who was our Assistant Director General for Culture at that time, really went out and reached incredible networks of religious authorities on Islam. Many of the mullahs, the most respected internationally in various communities in Egypt and Pakistan and Iraq, to say that really the interpretation of Islam is not to destroy something like this, to pass that message from a religious leader to the Taliban so that they might have a change of mind. And unfortunately, it didn't work. But that is the kind of diplomacy that you can use with culture and religion and language being very, very, very much rooted in our culture and identity and our way of communicating. And I thought that was an incredible tactic and a real challenge, and it came close, but that's what we were referring to.
It did come close. I have somebody...
Can I just make one more quick comment on
yes,
this,
please.
which had to do with the idea of interdisciplinarity. Because you mentioned agriculture, and I just wanted to mention that, the Aga Khan Trust is an interesting organization, and one of the things that they do is when they do their work, they require that you look at both the social, the economic, and the cultural, and you can't separate them, and I think it's an interesting strategy, and they are doing work in Afghanistan, and it allows you a place to say that the kinds of progress has to be outside of, you have to find ways to weave this together and not see everything so siloed. I mean, I think it speaks to what you were saying, that the culture is a part of the agriculture. I mean, they're working together, and we make these artificial separations.
No, there's no question about that. I think that it was the lady in the purple dress in the way back. Then I've got somebody over here, and then I think I'm going to have to wrap it. But let me just see how quick we go.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Megan Doherty. I'm from the American Irish Historical Society, and I have a question for our wonderful UNESCO representative here. I worked on the Millennium Development Goals campaign a couple years ago when I was in college, and I was a little disillusioned through my work of the intangible results and just sort of the rhetoric of the action versus the tangible factors pertaining to the movement. And I was wondering, I heard you mention the rapprochement des cultures of this year, and what should we expect in terms of tangible results? How are the member states being held accountable for their commitment to a year with this title?
We do not hold them accountable. We cannot control what anybody does or what results we get back. We advocate, we raise awareness, we get the member states, when they're at UNESCO deciding on this year, because we hold the mirror back up to them, they are the ones who negotiated this and who said that they wanted to declare this international year. They pushed it to become a UN General Assembly resolution. And so then they came back and we had them as we, the Secretariat, we said, okay, help us build this frame of action and these 4 points that I read out. Now that it's out there, yes, we have to ask them to report back to us, because UNESCO has to actually prepare a report that goes to the Secretary General, to Ban Ki-moon, and he's going to report on some of the initiatives of the international year. So in that sense, they have some kind of obligation, some kind of pressure to come back to UNESCO with some statistics and some numbers. We had an international conference, we promoted the tour of a variety of international dance troupes, but we send all of this out to them, but we cannot really hold them accountable beyond asking them to report back to us. We can't slap any wrists, unfortunately, or fortunately. That's the way it works in an intergovernmental organization. Same thing with our conventions. Once you've ratified the convention, you're supposed to be, as a state party to it, implementing it. As the Secretariat for all these conventions that I mentioned, UNESCO writes and says, okay, we have to do the status report every 4 years on the implementation of this convention. What has your state done? What laws have you legislated? What activities took place? But we can't come back and punish anyone for not doing enough, except in the situation, for example, of the World Heritage Committee. When a site becomes a World Heritage Site, the state party is under a requirement to maintain the value, the universal value of that site. And because we have a system of intergovernmental agencies and ICOM and ICOMOS and these very specialized groups who can go and check sporadically on the status of a site, there is this one pressure hanging over states' parties where they might have their site moved from the World Heritage List to the list of endangered World Heritage, or, as has happened now in 2 cases, for example, the city of Dresden, because they were going to build a highway through what is a World Heritage Site, the committee actually removed it from the World Heritage List. So that is one form of pressure, but that's rather exceptional. In terms of the Millennium Development Goals or the International Year for the Rapprochement of Cultures, the fact that the states have put the task to themselves is as much pressure as we can give, and then ask a reporting system back.
Thank you very much. This has got to be the last word. I'm sorry if somebody else had their hand up. Ma'am, will you please? And then we'll try to respond, and then thank you, everybody.
Thank you. So it sounds like creativity and culture are increasingly being used as tools for both development and diplomacy. But creativity also resists being co-opted and categorized, and often it's used as a tool to fight injustice. And the example of Hugh Makasela was mentioned earlier. So I'm wondering, is there room in the policies and programs that you all are describing to support and protect individuals who are using creativity and culture to stand up and oppose oppressive regimes or power structures? And would doing this at all conflict with or contrast with the diplomatic vision for creativity?
You want to tackle that? I'll give you one example from my own experience. There's an extraordinary Iranian filmmaker by the name of Jafar Panahi, who did a terrific film which won the top prize at the Berlin Film Festival in English, Offsides. We brought him here as a part of the first group of the 2020 program, and we did it. I mean, he almost got thrown in jail. I don't know whether he's still free at this point, but he almost got thrown in jail over this film, for which he avoided the Iranian government's permit requirements, et cetera, et cetera. And we brought him, made a huge effort and spent some money. And the State Department was excellent here to bring him to Hollywood, et cetera, et cetera. And that is an example of showcasing somebody who was standing up for freedom, and in this case it was girls being able to go to the game and that sort of thing on our part. However, having said that, the credibility of the United States doing this is not as great as might be the credibility of somebody else doing this. So we brought in some other countries who, I don't know that they were highly supportive of the Iranian government or anything, but we tried to soften the US piece of it as a part of this. So when you're doing these kinds of things, you have to, what I want to say, you have to have a very delicate approach. Please.
I think that what you said is extremely important. I'll give an example from Instituto Cervantes. Recently, we had a guest who was the founder of a very controversial magazine in the 80s in Spain, right after the end of the dictatorship, and this was an anarchist. His name is Pepe Rivas, and he was the founder of Ajo Blanco, which was a magazine where they feature all kind of articles analyzing culture from a perspective that has nothing to do with the official perspective. And I think that because we represent official entities, we must open our spaces so that other voices can be heard. And it is very important that these voices sometimes even, let me use a very strong word, attack official instances. I think that culture is kidnapped by sometimes corporations, look at the book industry, look at television, publicity, and many things like that. So it's very important that we open up our spaces so that there's grassroots movements that, do the essential things, which is the essence of this country, for instance. So that is of the essence. We should not control that, open up the spaces for these artists to say things that may be sometimes uncomfortable to hear.
Eduardo, I don't think anybody could have said it better. And with that, I think we should close the meeting and thank again John Bradamus for hosting us.